There was a time when I believed the ultimate truth resided in stillness, that the path to God was a straight line traced in ink and silence. I had shaped my life like a delicate manuscript, each moment pressed between margins of discipline and prayer. In those years, I was revered. People bowed when they spoke my name: Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi, teacher of jurisprudence, preacher of wisdom, bearer of pious knowledge. Students came from distant provinces, crossing mountains and deserts just to sit at my feet and drink from the well of what I had memorized. And I gave it to them generously: hadith, Quranic exegesis, philosophy, logic. My words flowed, structured, refined, never straying outside the borders I had built for myself. I thought that was enough. I thought I had arrived. Each morning before the first breath of dawn touched the soil, I would rise from my bed and walk barefoot into the courtyard of our home in Konya. There stood the fig tree, older than memory, its branches twisted like ancient thoughts, its trunk gnarled but dignified. I sat beneath it every day, always in the same spot, facing the rising sun, my hands folded in my lap like folded wings. The silence was my companion. The rhythmic chants of my heart became my prayer. I believed I was communing with the divine. I had no need for movement or interruption. The world could swirl in chaos, but I had mastered the art of stillness. Or so I told myself. Yet, even then, even in my supposed peace, there was something, some distant, quiet murmur beneath the floor of my soul. A soft vibration, like footsteps approaching from far away. I ignored it for a long time. It came in the form of odd restlessness, like a thought you cannot name or a door left slightly ajar. Once, while reciting to my students, I suddenly forgot the verse I had known by heart for decades. It slipped through my mind like water. They laughed gently. I smiled, but my chest was strangely tight. Another time, a beggar outside the mosque called out to me, not for food or coin, but to ask, "What do you really know of God, O learned one?" I gave him a coin. But his words followed me for days, clinging to the edges of my thoughts like smoke. I was surrounded by reverence, yet somewhere in the shadows of my certainty, I was beginning to feel the first hints of emptiness. And yet I resisted. I resisted change like one resists a storm when the roof has just been mended. My routines became tighter, my lectures more rigid, as if structure could protect me from whatever was approaching. But truth does not knock politely. It breaks doors. It spills in through cracks. It waits in silence, and then it floods. That morning, I remember it more clearly than any verse I've ever recited. The sky was a soft gray blue, the kind that makes you think the heavens are holding their breath. The air was unusually still, heavy with something unnamed. I walked into the courtyard, as I always did, but the silence wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to something larger. The fig tree, my old companion, stood solemn, unmoving. Not even a sparrow stirred in its branches. I sat. I folded my hands. I closed my eyes. But something was different. It was subtle at first. A pressure, like the hush before thunder. Then it grew, a sensation that the ground itself was awake beneath me, pulsing not with tremor, but with awareness. It was as if the earth remembered something I had forgotten. My heart, usually calm in meditation, beat faster. My fingers twitched against the fabric of my robe. My breath, once measured, grew uneven. I opened my eyes and looked around. Everything appeared unchanged. But I knew. Something unseen had stepped into my life. Not yet visible, not yet nameable, but present. Present like a question you never asked but always feared to answer. In that moment, I did not know his name. I did not know from which corner of the world he would come, nor how he would wear the shape of a man. I did not yet know that he would speak words that would shatter me. That he would strip me of everything I thought sacred, only to hand it back to me illuminated from within. That he would undo me so I could be remade. But my soul knew. Long before my mind could grasp it, my soul leaned forward toward the coming fire. They say that moments of true awakening do not arrive with thunder or spectacle, but in the quiet recognition that the life you are living is too small for the soul that resides within you. That was my moment. That hushed, breathless morning beneath the fig tree. I thought I had found peace, but I had only built a cage with golden bars. I thought I had stilled the world, but I had only silenced the winds of transformation. That day, the winds began to stir again. It was not fear that I felt, it was something deeper, more ancient. A trembling, yes, but not of danger. A trembling like the earth before the seed splits open. Like the breath just before the first note of music. Like the moment before birth. Change was coming. I could feel it. And in the far distance, the echo of footsteps approached. He came cloaked in dust, the color of wind-blown roads and faded parchment, as if he had been walking since the beginning of time. The dust didn't cling to him with the filth of travel. No, it seemed to shimmer faintly in the light, like stardust that had settled on his shoulders. His presence was not announced by trumpets or fanfare, but by a silence so deep it swallowed the noise of the world. The moment he stepped into Konya, it was as if an unseen tremor passed through the city, not one that shook the stones, but one that stirred the souls of those who had grown too used to stillness. He did not come to the city gates with proclamations or declarations. No entourage, no scrolls of introduction. Just a staff in hand, a sun-faded robe, and eyes that carried the weight of desert nights and the softness of spring dawns. Eyes that looked not at things but through them. Eyes that would haunt me long before I knew why. I first saw him not in a mosque or madrasa, but in the marketplace, of all places, in the simple chaos of daily life, amidst the shouting of merchants and the rustle of cloth and spice. I had come there seeking nothing in particular, perhaps merely to walk among the people, a habit I maintained to keep the illusion of humility intact. But that day, I felt watched, not by malice or curiosity, but by something more ancient. I turned, and there he stood, beside a fruit stall, speaking to the vendor about figs as if they were the holiest of revelations. I watched him lift one in his hand, turning it slowly, reverently, before taking a bite. The vendor laughed at something he said, and the sound was so genuine, so light, that even the birds in the air seemed to pause. I had known many men. Scholars with minds like sharpened swords, mystics who danced on the edges of madness, beggars whose silence was a sermon. But this man, this traveler, was none of them and all of them. He had the bearing of someone who had already died and been reborn 100 times, and who now walked not to seek answers but to ignite questions. When our eyes met, it was not a glance, it was a collision. As if two worlds, long separated, had been suddenly reunited. His gaze entered me like a wind through an open window, unsettling the dust I had allowed to settle within my soul. He did not bow, nor did he avert his gaze, and I felt something in my chest tighten. I turned away, pretending not to notice, but my feet lingered, my ears strained to hear his voice over the marketplace clamor. A part of me, deep, buried, wild, recognized him. I returned to the madrasa that afternoon, troubled and silent. My students noticed the shift in my mood. They asked if I was ill. I waved them away with a smile, but the truth was I felt like a cracked pot filled with storm water, fragile, trembling, full of something I could not name. Later that evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, word came to me that a man was at the gates asking to see me. He says he has questions, the guard explained, eyeing me warily. He says his name is Shams of Tabriz. The name was unfamiliar, yet the sound of it struck something within me. Let him in, I said, without hesitation. When he entered the hall, I felt the air change. He did not walk as most men do, not in arrogance, nor in humility, but with the grace of someone who belonged wherever he stood. He bowed his head slightly, then looked at me, not as a student, not as a subject, but as a reflection. It was unsettling. You are the one they call Rumi, he said. I am, I replied. And you are Shams of Tabriz. I am only one who is searching, he said. I've heard you speak of God. I've heard your words. I've read your poems. But now I have come to ask, do you speak from the fire, or do you merely describe its light? The word struck me like a slap across still water. My students, seated nearby, exchanged glances, clearly offended. But I was disarmed. I, who had sat for decades at the seat of knowledge, found myself speechless. Not because I lacked a response, but because something in me knew he had asked the only question that mattered. He continued, his voice calm and quiet but firm. Do you know the taste of divine longing, or do you recite it from memory? Have you ever let God undo you? That was the beginning. For hours we spoke. No, we clashed, we collided, we spiraled around each other like galaxies in motion. He challenged everything. My understanding of faith, my sense of self, the boundaries I had drawn between knowledge and love, between devotion and surrender. I spoke of jurisprudence, of sacred texts, of logic and reason. He listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling, but always with that same intensity, as if he were not hearing my words, but weighing my soul. Your mind is a lamp, he said, but the oil must come from the heart. Without love, the flame burns cold. I argued. I resisted. I quoted scholars and saints, but he responded with riddles and silences. At one point I said, almost in anger, "Are you trying to confuse me?" He looked at me then, deeply, the way the sky looks at the sea. "No," he said. "I am trying to unconfuse you." That night I could not sleep. I walked the garden paths alone, the stars indifferent above me, my thoughts ablaze. What was he? A prophet? A madman? A reflection of my own hidden self? I did not know. I only knew that I wanted more. I wanted to hear him again, to be near that fire, to risk being bound. In the days that followed, he returned. And each time he did, something in me unraveled. My students began to murmur. My family grew uneasy. He is strange, they said. He is changing you. And I could not deny it. I was changing. But I did not resist. Because Shams did not come to teach. He came to transform. He came not to place new jewels upon my crown, but to smash it, to show me the head underneath. He did not come to build upon my foundation. He came to make me realize the foundation itself was sand. And I who had been the teacher, had become the student. I had spent my life building walls of discipline, walls of identity, walls of spiritual theory. And here was a man who walked straight through them like they were smoke. A dervish cloaked in dust, yes, but also in truth. A truth I had longed for without ever admitting it. The others could not see it. They saw only a vagabond challenging their master. But I saw more. I saw a mirror. I saw the fire. I saw a soul unchained. And I began to wonder, what might happen if I let myself be unchained too? He returned every day as though he had never left, as though time obeyed him, not the other way around. Shams of Tabriz never entered a space, he inhabited it. When he walked into a room, it was as if something elemental arrived with him, the way a thundercloud darkens the ground before it ever bursts, or how a deep cello note fills the air before you even realize you're hearing it. He did not perform piety. He did not wear his holiness like a robe. He was not cloaked in humility the way I had taught others to be. And yet, I could not deny the holiness that hung around him like a second skin. There was no distinction between his body and his words, no hesitation in his heart. He was the kind of man who belonged to no place and yet made every place feel as though it had waited centuries for his arrival. I resisted him, even as I was drawn to him. It wasn't the kind of resistance born of disdain, but of fear, a primal fear, the kind a tree might feel when the axe whispers against its bark, promising freedom from rootedness. I had spent my life cultivating knowledge, not wildness. I was the keeper of order, a scholar surrounded by scrolls, titles, and admiration. My lectures were praised. My presence revered. My interpretations of scripture cited in gatherings far beyond Kanya. I had become, without fully realizing it, a man safely embalmed in reverence. And now here came Shams, unwashed, unpredictable, unbothered, looking at me as if I were asleep with my eyes open. He asked questions that made my carefully built edifice tremble. Questions I did not know I had buried, like forgotten bones beneath the floorboards of my soul. "Have you ever tasted your own heart?" he asked once, sipping from a chipped bowl of tea we shared beneath the olive trees. "Have you ever wept for God with no one watching, with no desire to be seen as spiritual?" I opened my mouth to answer, but he raised his hand. "No, not with words. Answer from your breath, from your stillness, or better yet, from your longing." That night, I paced in my study, unable to rest. I took down my old volumes, my annotations of the great theologians, my marginalia on the law. I opened the Quran and stared at the verses that had once comforted me. They were still beautiful, still perfect. But something had shifted in me. They no longer felt like distant stars to be mapped. They felt like doors I had never truly stepped through. Shams said to me once, "You treat the divine like a poem you are proud to recite. But have you ever let it break you open?" I had no answer. No honest one, at least. I had always thought God to be a concept to be grasped, revered, defended. But in Sham's presence, God felt like a wound. Not one inflicted, but one revealed. A place inside me I had long sealed shut with prayers too pretty and thoughts too practiced. He did not care for rituals unless they burned with real presence. He did not revere sacred texts unless they came alive through experience. He did not chase virtue for reputation. He chased truth, wild and unwieldy. "There are many who pray," he said, "but few who let their prayers become blood." I asked what he meant. He only smiled and said, "You will see." Slowly, I began to sense the cost of his companionship. My students, once loyal and obedient, began to distance themselves. Some questioned my judgment. Others whispered that I had been possessed, that a devil in dervish's robes had bewitched me. My sons asked me to be cautious. "Father," they said, "this man, he is changing you." And they were right. He was. But what they did not understand was that it wasn't a change I resisted, it was a change I needed. They saw a fire consuming their teacher. But I felt something far stranger. I felt myself returning to life. I remember a night during the third week of his visits. The moon was full, painting the courtyard in silver. Shams and I sat across from each other, silent for nearly an hour. Not a word passed between us. Just breath, presence, listening. Finally, he spoke. "You are afraid that if you break, you will lose yourself. But you do not see that you are not what you think you are. You are not your teachings. You are not your fame. You are not even your name. You are the emptiness behind all of it. Let it be filled." I felt the weight of his words fall into me like a stone dropped into a still pond. And I broke. Not visibly, not loudly, but in the unseen places. The cracking began in the deep architecture of my soul, where certainty had lived like a tyrant. I did not even know I had been clenched for so long until I began to loosen. I did not know I had been blind until I began to see the shape of my own blindness. After that night, the world looked different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. The trees in the courtyard now moved like dancers in prayer. The call to prayer sounded not like obligation, but invitation. Even the silence between the sounds spoke to me in languages I could feel in my bones. I found myself weeping at things I once overlooked, the flight of a single bird, the laughter of a child, the quiet bloom of jasmine in the corner of a cracked wall. I began to write differently too. Not to teach, but to surrender. My words no longer sought to convince, they sought to empty. I no longer wished to be admired. I only wanted to be dissolved. The poet in me awakened, not as a craftsman, but as a reed flute hollowed by longing. And the wind, the breath of the divine, began to play through me. Shams never called me a poet. He never praised my words. He only asked me if I meant them. Words are cheap, he said. You can sew silk garments of language, but if they aren't soaked in your soul, they are just fabric. He was right. My poetry began to bleed. It sang of love not as a sweetness, but as a fire that consumes. It spoke of God not as a concept, but as a burning absence, a haunting presence. I found myself writing in the middle of the night, candlelight flickering on the page, my heart beating like a drum, each word carved from my ribs. But all this came at a cost. My reputation began to crack. People said I had gone mad. That the teacher they once revered had become a mystic, a drunk on divine wine. I heard them, but their voices grew dim. Not because I was arrogant, but because I had found something more compelling than praise. I had found truth, not in answers, but in surrender. And I owed it all to the man they feared. To the dervish in dust. To the mirror I had never asked for, but had always needed. To the one who held a match to the scrolls of my identity and whispered, "Let it burn." The days blurred further into a living current. Not a march of calendar pages, not the tolling of time as men measured it, but something more fluid, like a river weaving through my chest, like breath entering and leaving, a rhythm dictated by love rather than obligation. Time with Shams could not be counted in hours. It could only be felt, through tremors of the soul, through the deep silence after one of his questions settled into the earth of my being. Even his silences taught me. Even the way he sipped his tea, or walked barefoot in the courtyard, taught me. He was a fire disguised as a man. And I who had spent a lifetime fearing the burn, was beginning to step closer, willingly, with open arms. I found myself changing in ways too subtle to name. I would wake before the call to prayer not to fulfill a duty, but to sit with the stars, to breathe beneath the fig tree, to listen to the wind in ways I never had before. I stopped preparing my sermons. I stopped writing outlines for lectures. Instead, I waited. I waited until something moved inside me, not a thought, but a presence. And then I spoke. And when I did, I found my words no longer resembled the polished phrases I had once been proud of. They emerged raw, alive, soaked in longing, dripping with the ache of love. They were less mine and more like echoes of something vast speaking through me. One evening, I sat with Shams beside a brazier of glowing coals. The night had settled thick upon the city, and the lamps in the windows were flickering like stars too weary to shine. We had said little for hours. Finally, I broke the silence, asking, "Shams, what is this that is happening to me? I feel like I am being unraveled." He smiled, not a soft smile, but one edged with a kind of fierce compassion, as if he could see every thread that was coming loose inside me. "That's because you are," he said. "And it's beautiful. You were wrapped too tightly in the shroud of who you thought you had to be. Now you're learning to wear your soul without armor." "But I don't know who I am anymore," I confessed. "I feel like a house with its walls removed. Everything I knew, everything I was certain of, is falling away." Shams leaned forward, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Good," he said. "Now life can move through you. Now God can speak without having to knock first." His words struck something deep in me. I had spent so many years building a fortress of certainty. I had thought that God wanted order, clarity, piety dressed in robes of decorum. But Shams showed me a different truth, that God didn't care for my masks. That the beloved preferred to enter where there were cracks. That transformation didn't come through perfection, but through surrender. Through the willingness to be torn open. After that night, I began to listen more and speak less. Not just to people, but to life itself. To the way the leaves trembled in the morning light. To the laughter of children playing in the alleyways. To the sound of my own breath when I sat alone, hands folded in my lap, eyes closed. I realized that every moment was a messenger. That every encounter, every passing stranger, every ache in my chest, every joy that made my eyes wet, each of these was life living through me. And for the first time, I stopped resisting. I stopped resisting the pain of letting go. I let myself mourn the man I had been, the scholar, the praised, the revered. I wept not because I regretted his passing, but because I had loved him. He had served me well, that former Rumi. He had built a temple of words to hold my yearning. But temples are not meant to last forever. Sometimes, the most sacred thing is their collapse. And so I let the collapse come. My students watched me with suspicion. Many began to leave. Some called me a heretic. Others said I had been enchanted, ensnared by a mystic charlatan. I did not defend myself. For the first time, I felt no need to be understood. I felt no urgency to explain my path to those who could not hear the music that now moved my feet. Shams had taught me that truth was not about argument, it was about becoming. You did not have to convince the world you were aflame. You simply had to burn, and those who needed the light would find you. My family, too, grew afraid. My sons approached me with worried eyes. "Father," they said, "you are no longer yourself." And they were right. I wasn't. I was someone else now. Or perhaps I was finally becoming the self that had been waiting beneath all the layers. A self not built of roles or rules, but of love. And that love was not soft. It was not sweet. It was a fierce and holy hunger. A yearning that gripped my ribs and pulled me toward the divine with a force that shattered everything I had once held close. I would wake in the middle of the night shaking, breathless, with verses spilling out of me like rain. I would walk the city in silence, not looking for answers but listening for signs. And the signs came, not as miracles, but as moments. A beggar's smile. A hawk circling above the minaret. A single red poppy growing through a crack in the stone. One afternoon, Shams and I sat atop a hill overlooking the city. The wind was fierce, pulling at our robes, flinging dust into the air. He turned to me and said, "You see how the wind dances? It does not ask permission. It does not apologize. It simply moves. This is how you must live now. No more waiting for approval. No more fearing disapproval. Let the wind move through you. Let God have his way with your soul." I closed my eyes and felt the wind press against me, and I did not resist. I thought of the life I had once clung to, the security, the praise, the reputation. I thought of the man who had risen before dawn to perfect his sermons. The man who feared mistakes, who feared questions without answers. That man was now a memory, a ghost. And I thanked him. I thanked the one I used to be, even as I buried him beneath the fig tree that had witnessed my quiet prayers for so many years. I whispered a prayer over the soil, not for him to return, but for him to rest. Shams watched me, saying nothing. And in his silence, I felt the presence of God more fully than I ever had in the loudest of chants, in the most elaborate of rituals. I was not the same, and I would never be again, because I had begun to let life live through me. Not in fragments, not in caution, but in wild, burning wholeness. The transformation that was unfolding inside me was not a gentle unfolding, like the slow blooming of a flower under the warming sun. No, it was more like a fierce storm tearing through the landscape of my soul, wild, unrelenting, and utterly unstoppable. Each day the walls I had built to protect myself, walls of certainty, of knowledge, of carefully crafted identity, began to crumble and fall away, leaving me vulnerable to winds of change I neither understood nor wished to control. Shams did not urge or compel me. He simply existed with such presence that in his light, I was compelled to unravel, to shed the old skin of a man I thought I had become, without resistance, without fear. My own thoughts became strange companions, familiar yet distant, like echoes from a life I no longer recognized. The words that once brought comfort, theology, law, logic, now sounded like empty shells, brittle and hollow. I could no longer hide behind learned answers or tidy explanations. Instead, a deeper longing gnawed relentlessly at the edges of my soul, a yearning not for more knowledge, but for something far greater, surrender. Not surrender in defeat, but surrender in trust. A willingness to be swept away in the currents of life itself, no longer struggling against the flow, but flowing with it. One late afternoon, restless and heavy with this strange new yearning, I wandered through the bustling marketplace of Konya. The familiar clamor of merchants and buyers, the calls of vendors hawking figs and pomegranates, the rattle of carts, the chatter of neighbors, all felt distant, like sounds from a dream. Then, as if called by some unseen thread, I stopped beside a young boy sitting quietly at the roadside. His garments were threadbare, his face streaked with dust and sun, but his eyes shone with an unshakable joy and fearless innocence. He hummed a melody I could not place, a song that seemed woven from sunlight and earth, simple and pure. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt a sudden jolt deep within, a pang of recognition, of kinship with this spirit unburdened by the weight of the world. I sat beside him, allowing the marketplace's noise to fade into a distant hum. "Teach me your song," I whispered, feeling the strange need to learn the simplicity of his joy. The boy smiled, unaware of the gravity I felt, and began humming again, the tune rising and falling like the breath of the earth itself. In his melody, I heard a truth I had long forgotten. Life was not a puzzle to be solved, nor a riddle to be mastered, but a dance to be joined, wild, free, and unending. And suddenly I understood how tightly I had held on to my pride, my knowledge, my role as scholar and teacher, when all that was truly needed was to let go and surrender to the music of existence. That evening, I returned home, heart heavy yet strangely lightened, and found Shams waiting in the courtyard, his eyes flickering with firelight and a deeper knowing. We sat together, silence stretching between us thick and alive. Finally, he spoke. "You resist the river, but the river does not resist the stones it passes. It flows around them, over them, carrying them in its course. You must learn to flow, not to hold." His words struck through me like a lance, piercing the core of my resistance. I realized I had been like a stone, rigid and unyielding, believing that strength lay in standing firm, in clinging to what I knew and who I thought I was. But true strength, I began to see, was in yielding, in bending without breaking, in allowing oneself to be shaped by the current of life instead of fighting it. The idea of surrender terrified me, to relinquish control, to be carried by forces unknown, yet it also awakened a fierce longing. To flow with life, rather than resist it, was the beginning of true freedom. Days melted into weeks, and the murmurs in the city grew louder. My students, once loyal and devoted, now looked upon me with suspicion and confusion. My family gathered with worried faces, whispering among themselves. "You are not the man we knew," they said. "You are lost." But I was not lost. I was found, in a place beyond names, beyond doctrines, beyond the masks I had worn for so long. I was discovering a truth that demanded everything I had and offered nothing tangible in return. One evening, as twilight folded over the sky like a velvet cloak, Shams took my hand and led me to a quiet garden. Jasmine blossomed around us, filling the air with a fragrance both intoxicating and serene. He looked deeply into my eyes and said, "When the soul lies down in that garden of surrender, the world becomes too full to speak about. You will understand then, not with your mind, but with your being." I longed to understand. I longed to be. But I realized it was not something to be grasped or mastered. It was to be lived, moment by moment, breath by breath. I closed my eyes and surrendered to the vastness of his promise, feeling the weight of years of resistance lift from my chest. From that moment, I ceased to fear change. I welcomed it, even when it tore through me like a tempest. because I understood now that to resist was to deny life itself, to shrink from the very force that shapes and carries us forward. Instead, I chose to surrender, to let life live through me, to become a vessel for the infinite dance of creation and destruction, joy and sorrow, love and loss. And in that surrender, I found freedom, a freedom deeper than knowledge, purer than doctrine, more alive than any certainty I had ever held. It was a freedom born from the fire of transformation, from the courage to break and be remade again and again, like the river that flows endlessly to the sea, like the wind that moves unbidden through the trees, like the soul unfolding in the vast embrace of the divine. Yet this freedom was no tranquil peace. It was wild and raw, a sacred hunger that gripped my ribs and pulled me toward the beloved with a force that shattered everything I had held dear. I would wake in the dead of night, my heart pounding, verses spilling out of me like rain on thirsty earth. I would walk the silent streets of Konya, not seeking answers but listening for signs, a child's laughter, the cry of a night bird, a single red poppy blooming defiantly through cracked stone. One day, on a hill overlooking the city, with the wind fierce against our robes, Sham said, "See how the wind dances. It asks no permission, apologizes for nothing. It simply moves. This is how you must live now. No more waiting for approval, no more fearing disapproval. Let the wind move through you. Let God have his way with your soul." I closed my eyes and let the wind press against me, and I did not resist. In that moment, I thought of the man I had been, the scholar rising before dawn, the preacher afraid to falter, the man who sought to control every word, every thought. That man was now a ghost, a shadow I had laid to rest beneath the fig tree where I had once prayed for certainty. I whispered a prayer over that memory, not for its return, but for its peace. Shams watched me silently, and in his quiet presence, I felt the fullness of God's love more deeply than I had ever known in the loudest of chants or the most elaborate rituals. I was not the same, and I would never be again, because I had begun to let life live through me, not in pieces, not cautiously, but with wild, burning wholeness. The transformation unfolding within me was no quiet, gentle awakening like the soft rise of dawn. It was a tempest stirring in the depths of my soul, a fierce, relentless upheaval that tore down the walls I had so carefully constructed over a lifetime. Each day, those walls of certainty, of knowledge, of identity, of the carefully maintained image of myself as scholar, teacher, and man of faith, cracked and crumbled like ancient stone shaken by an unyielding earthquake. Vulnerability pressed in from all sides, bringing with it winds of change I neither sought nor could control. Yet, in the presence of Shams, who neither pushed nor commanded but simply was, I found myself drawn irresistibly toward that unraveling, that shedding of all I thought defined me. I could no longer resist, I had to let go. My own thoughts, once my closest companions, began to feel strange and distant, like echoes from a long-forgotten dream. The words and doctrines that had once comforted me, logic, law, theology, now rang hollow, empty shells that no longer held meaning. Instead, a deeper yearning gnawed at my heart, a hunger not for knowledge, but for surrender, a surrender not born of defeat, but of trust and longing. The desire to be carried by life itself, to flow freely with its currents instead of standing rigid against them. One late afternoon, burdened by this restless ache, I wandered through the crowded marketplace of Konya. The cacophony of voices, vendors shouting, carts clattering, neighbors calling, felt distant, as if muffled behind a veil I could not lift. Then, unexpectedly, my eyes settled on a young boy sitting quietly by the roadside. His clothes were worn, his face dust-streaked, yet his eyes shone with fearless joy and a lightness I had long forgotten. He hummed a simple tune, pure and unadorned, a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. When our eyes met, a sudden jolt passed through me, a deep recognition of a soul untouched by the burdens I carried. I sat beside him, allowing the noisy world to fade. "Teach me your song," I whispered, yearning to reclaim that freedom. The boy smiled, unaware of the gravity behind my words, and hummed again, a melody that rose and fell like the breath of the earth. In that simple tune, I heard a profound truth. life was not a riddle to solve or a puzzle to master, but a dance to join, wild, free, and unending. Suddenly I saw how tightly I had clung to pride and knowledge, the roles of scholar and teacher, when all I truly needed was to let go and move with the music of existence. That evening, returning home, my heart both heavy and light, I found Shams waiting in the courtyard. His eyes flickered with firelight and a deeper knowing. We sat in silence, the weight of unspoken truths filling the space between us. Finally, he said, "You resist the river, but the river does not resist the stones it passes. It flows around them, over them, carrying them in its course. You must learn to flow, not to hold." His words struck me like a lance through my resistance. I realized I had been like a stone, rigid and immovable, believing strength lay in standing firm, in holding on to what I knew and who I thought I was. But true strength, I began to see, was in yielding, in bending without breaking, in letting the current shape and carry me. The thought of surrender terrified me, the loss of control, the unknown, but it also stirred a fierce longing within me. To flow with life, not resist it, was the path to freedom. Weeks passed, and the city murmured with growing suspicion. My students, once loyal, looked upon me with confusion. My family whispered their fears. "You are not the man we knew," they said. "You are lost." But I was not lost. I was found, in a place beyond words and roles, beyond the masks I had worn. I was discovering a truth that demanded everything and offered nothing tangible in return. One twilight, Shams led me to a quiet garden blooming with jasmine. The scent was intoxicating and serene. Looking deep into my eyes, he said, "When the soul lies down in that garden of surrender, the world becomes too full to speak about. You will understand then, not with your mind, but with your being." I longed to understand, to be. But it was not something to grasp or master, it was to live, moment by moment, breath by breath. I closed my eyes and surrendered to the vastness of his promise, feeling the years of resistance fall away. From then on, I ceased fearing change. I welcomed it, even as it tore me like a tempest. Because resistance denies life, denies the force that shapes and carries us forward. I chose surrender, to let life live through me, to become a vessel for creation and destruction, joy and sorrow, love and loss. In that surrender, I found freedom, deeper than knowledge, purer than doctrine, more alive than any certainty. A freedom born in fire and courage, in breaking and remaking, like a river flowing endlessly to the sea, like wind moving unbidden through the trees, like a soul unfolding in the divine's embrace. Yet this freedom was not calm peace. It was wild and raw, a sacred hunger gripping my ribs, pulling me toward the beloved with a force that shattered all I held dear. I woke in the night, heart pounding, verses raining from my lips. I walked Konya's silent streets, not seeking answers but signs, a child's laughter, a night bird's cry, a single red poppy pushing through cracked stone. One day, atop a windswept hill overlooking the city, Shams said, "See how the wind dances. It asks no permission, apologizes for nothing. It simply moves. This is how you must live now. No more waiting for approval, no more fearing disapproval. Let the wind move through you. Let God have his way with your soul." I closed my eyes, felt the wind press against me, and did not resist. I thought of the man I'd been, the scholar rising before dawn, the preacher afraid to falter, the man seeking control over every word, every thought. That man was now a ghost, laid to rest beneath the fig tree where I once prayed for certainty. I whispered a prayer over that memory, not for his return, but for peace. Shams watched me in silence, and in his quiet presence, I felt God's love more deeply than ever, in loud chants, elaborate rituals, or learned texts. I was not the same, and I would never be again. Because I had begun to let life live through me, not cautiously, not in pieces, but with wild, burning wholeness. The deeper I ventured into the path of surrender, the more the familiar contours of my life began to dissolve like mist at dawn. What had once seemed solid and permanent, My role as scholar, my reputation as a wise man, the teachings I had carefully crafted and preached, became fragile shadows slipping through my fingers. I stood on the edge of a vast, boundless ocean, feeling both fear and exhilaration in the same breath. This ocean was not a cold void but a living presence, a vast current that pulsed with the heartbeat of the divine. To step into it was to relinquish control, to let go of all that I had held as my identity, and to become something new, a vessel for life itself to move through. One evening, as twilight painted the sky with soft hues of violet and gold, Shams and I walked beneath a canopy of ancient trees, their leaves whispering secrets in the gentle breeze. The city around us was settling into quiet, the sounds of daily life fading into distant murmurs. Yet within me, a storm raged, an endless procession of questions and doubts that no doctrine or reason could quell. Shams, ever attentive, finally broke the silence with a simple question. "What is it you seek, Rumi?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. For years I believed I knew what I sought, knowledge, truth, union with God. But now, those desires felt pale and distant. "I seek peace," I confessed, my voice barely above the rustling leaves. But peace slips through my grasp like water, always flowing beyond reach. Shams smiled, a smile filled with a profound compassion that warmed the chill of my uncertainty. "Peace is not a possession to be held," he said softly. "It is the space that remains when all grasping ceases. You cannot find it by chasing, only by releasing." His words struck me like a lightning bolt, illuminating a truth I had long evaded. I realized that all my striving, the sermons, the debates, the scholarly pursuits, were attempts to capture and contain the infinite, to build a fortress of certainty against the unknown. But the divine is not a thing to be caught or controlled. It is a flowing river, a wild wind, a fire that cannot be tamed. To meet it, I must become water, wind, fire, fluid, open, alive. In the days that followed, I began to see the world anew. I observed the river as it wove effortlessly around stones, the birds as they sang without hesitation, the flowers that opened to the sun without asking permission. Life itself moved in harmony with change, embracing the endless dance of becoming and passing away. I yearned to move as they did, not as a rigid stone resisting the current, but as a flowing stream carried by a larger force. Yet surrender was no easy path. The self I had clung to, the respected teacher, the master of knowledge, felt like a fading ghost. I grieved its passing deeply, mourning the loss of certainty, status, and control. This morning was a shadow I had to walk through, a valley of darkness where the old self was laid to rest so that the new self could be born. One morning, at the riverbank where the water gleamed like molten silver under the rising sun, I sat in silent reflection. The river sang a song of movement and release, and I felt my fears and doubts wash away like leaves on its current. In that moment, I understood that resistance is the root of suffering, and peace grows only from surrender, not passive resignation, but an active, joyous yielding to life's flow. Returning to Shams, I shared my revelation. He nodded, eyes sparkling. "You are learning," he said. "True wisdom is to flow with life's changes, to let life live through you without resistance. This is freedom beyond all understanding." As the weeks passed, I found myself less bound by the judgments of others. The opinions of students and family, once so vital to my sense of self, lost their power to unsettle me. My poetry blossomed with new fervor, spontaneous verses that poured forth from a place beyond the intellect, filled with love, longing, and the paradox of breaking and becoming whole. Still, challenges arose. Friends distanced themselves, unable to follow the path I now walked. Family voiced fears, questioning my sanity and devotion. But I stood firm in the freedom I had found, a freedom no earthly opinion could touch. In solitude, I pondered surrender as a lifelong unfolding, a continual letting go, a constant opening to mystery. To surrender was to embrace paradox, joy and sorrow, light and shadow, certainty and doubt. It was to allow the divine to shape, break, and remake me anew. One night, beneath a moonlit sky, I sat by my window, feeling gratitude swell within me for the journey, the pain, the ecstasy, the loss, the gain. I understood that resistance was like clutching water tightly in one's hands. Only by opening the palms could the water flow freely. True peace, true freedom, came when I let life live through me, when I became a vessel for the divine's endless dance. And in this surrender, paradoxically, I found myself more fully than ever, whole, alive, and deeply connected to the mystery that moves through all creation. I was no longer merely a man. I was a part of the great unfolding, a drop in the ocean, a breath of the eternal. This was the gift of surrender, the wild, sacred dance of life flowing through me without resistance. The more I allowed myself to flow with life's changes, the more I realized that surrender was not a single act but an ongoing pilgrimage, a lifelong dance between holding on and letting go, between knowing and unknowing, between fear and trust. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new invitations to deepen my faith in the unseen current that moves through all things. It was a path that required me to shed the heavy cloak of resistance, to soften the clenched fists of control, and to open my heart wide enough to hold both joy and sorrow, hope and despair. In the stillness of early mornings, before the city stirred to life, I would sit beneath the great plane tree in the courtyard, its broad branches offering shade and shelter. The air was cool and fragrant with dew, and the soft cooing of doves filled the quiet. In those moments, I felt myself merging with the world around me, not as a separate self observing from afar, but as a living part of the vast tapestry of existence. I breathed in the sweetness of the earth, the whisper of the breeze, the gentle murmur of the river nearby. It was as if the very breath of God moved through me, weaving me into the fabric of life itself. Yet surrender was not an escape from pain or struggle. On the contrary, it was a courageous embrace of all that life offered, the ecstatic and the agonizing, the sacred and the profane. I learned to welcome grief as a teacher, to honor loss as a doorway, to see suffering not as punishment but as a passageway to deeper understanding. When the shadow of despair crept close, would remind myself of the river's flow, how it carries both the debris of the past and the promise of new beginnings downstream. One afternoon, walking through the crowded bazaar, I noticed a blind musician playing a simple, haunting melody on his reed flute. Despite his darkness, his music was filled with light, a testimony to the power of the human spirit to find beauty amid hardship. I paused to listen, feeling tears well in my eyes, and in that moment understood that surrender was not about weakness but about finding strength in vulnerability. It was about being fully present, fully alive, even when the path was uncertain. Shams continued to be my guide and mirror on this journey. His presence was both a balm and a flame, a source of peace and a challenge to grow. He would often say, "To surrender is to be reborn again and again." Each time you let go, you shed a layer of illusion and come closer to the beloved. His words encouraged me to release not only my fears but also my attachments to identity, reputation, and expectation. I was learning to live not from the surface but from the depths of my soul. As I opened more deeply to surrender, my poetry became a sacred channel, a voice for the ineffable truths stirring within me. Verses flowed like a river breaking free from a dam, filled with paradox and paradox's beauty. How loss can birth love, how breaking can lead to wholeness, how death is but a doorway to life eternal. I wrote of the wind that cannot be held, of the flame that consumes and illuminates, of the water that yields and carves new paths. Each poem was a prayer, a meditation, a celebration of life's eternal dance. Yet, I knew that surrender was never final. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, just as the seasons turn, my heart too would face moments of doubt and fear. When shadows gathered, I returned to the practices that rooted me: prayer, meditation, the companionship of those who walked the path. I reminded myself that surrender is a practice, a daily offering to the divine mystery. One night, beneath a sky thick with stars, Shams and I sat by the fire, its flames flickering like living spirits. He looked at me with eyes full of kindness and mischief and said, "Remember, Rumi, surrender is not a destination but a journey without end. It is the dance of the soul, forever moving between holding on and letting go. His words were both a comfort and a call to continue walking the path with courage and openness. I reflected on how far I had come, from the man who sought certainty and control, to one who embraced mystery and flow. I understood now that life's changes were not enemies to be fought, but beloved teachers to be welcomed. In surrendering, I was not losing myself, but discovering the true self beneath all masks, the self that is one with the divine, with all beings, with the endless dance of creation. In the quiet moments before sleep, I often whispered a prayer of gratitude for this journey, for the pain that purified, the love that healed, the changes that transformed. I was no longer afraid to be carried by life's river, no longer clinging to the shore. I had become the river itself, flowing, changing, alive. And in that flowing, I found the boundless peace and freedom that comes only when we let life live through us, without resistance, with open hearts and surrendered souls. The journey into surrender unfolded before me like an endless tapestry, each thread woven with moments of revelation, struggle, and grace. The more I embraced the flow of life, the more I realized that surrender was not a simple yielding but an awakening, a profound aliveness that transformed every breath and every step into a sacred act. It was not a retreat from the world but a deep immersion into its mysteries, a wholehearted acceptance of all that is, with open arms and an open heart. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky with hues of rose and gold, I wandered through the labyrinthine streets of Konya. The city was stirring, the merchants raising their shutters, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from ovens, the distant call to prayer echoing from minarets. Yet beneath these familiar sounds, I perceived a deeper symphony, the rhythm of creation itself, unfolding in infinite variety and complexity. It was as if the very air was alive with the pulse of the divine, inviting me to join the dance of existence. In the faces of the people I passed, the weary labor greeting the day with quiet resolve, the mother cradling her child with fierce tenderness, the old storyteller weaving tales of love and loss, I saw reflections of my own journey. Each bore the marks of change and surrender, whether they named it or not. I felt a profound kinship with them all, recognizing that surrender is not a solitary path but the shared heartbeat of humanity. It is the invisible thread that binds us across time and space, the sacred dance that moves through every soul. My own heart, once guarded by walls of certainty and fear, now opened wide like a blossoming rose. I welcomed the winds of transformation that swept through me, the gentle breezes of joy and the fierce storms of grief alike. Sometimes surrender felt like a soaring flight, a joyous release into boundless freedom. Other times, it felt like plunging into an abyss, a surrender so complete that the very ground beneath me seemed to dissolve. Yet even in those darkest depths, I discovered a strange sweetness, a mysterious presence cradling me with infinite compassion, whispering that I was never truly alone. Shams remained my steadfast companion, a mirror reflecting my soul and a flame igniting my spirit. His presence was both comfort and challenge, guiding me to embrace the paradoxes of surrender. To surrender, he would say, is to dance with the beloved, to lose yourself so completely that only love remains. His words were not mere philosophy but living breath, resonating deep within my being. With him, I learned that surrender is not a final destination but an eternal opening, a ceaseless letting go and coming home. In the stillness of night, beneath the canopy of stars, I poured my heart into poetry, verses that flowed from a place beyond thought, words that sang of fire and water, of breaking and healing, of death and rebirth. Each poem was a step deeper into the sacred mystery, a prayer woven from trembling hands and an open heart. Sometimes the words rushed forth like a torrent, flooding my soul with their intensity. At other times, they emerged as gentle whispers, delicate petals unfolding in the dawn's first light. I also came to understand that surrender demanded not the absence of fear but the courage to face fear unflinchingly. When shadows lengthened and doubts crept in, I summoned the strength born from the divine's embrace. I reminded myself that the path was not about reaching some perfect state but about walking faithfully through the ever-shifting landscape of life, hand in hand with mystery. There were moments when the old attachments tugged fiercely, attachments to identity, certainty, and the illusion of control. In those times, I would close my eyes, breathe deeply, and remember the river that flows tirelessly to the sea, never pausing to question its course. I recalled that my true nature was like that river, ever moving, ever changing, always returning to the vast ocean of love. The city around me pulsed with life's relentless rhythm, its streets alive with the ceaseless dance of creation and dissolution. I was no longer separate from this dance but an active participant, moving in harmony with its tempo, responding to its call with open heart and steady feet. To let life live through me was to be fully present, to embrace each moment's fullness without resistance or hesitation. And in that surrender, I found a joy beyond words, a joy not dependent on circumstances or outcomes but arising from the profound truth that I was alive, beloved, and free. Free to flow like the river, to change like the seasons, to be a vessel for the divine's endless dance. This was the heart of surrender, a wild, sacred freedom that carries the soul beyond fear and into the light of love eternal. In the quiet sanctuary of that jasmine-scented garden, where twilight's soft embrace wrapped the world in gentle shadows, I felt the fullness of surrender settle deep within my bones. It was as though every fiber of my being was being reshaped, not by force, but by the tender hands of a presence far greater than myself. This presence moved like a river, steady and ceaseless, carving through rock and soil, patient yet relentless. I understood then that surrender was not a single act of giving up, but a lifelong communion, a sacred dance between the soul and the divine, where life flows freely through the vessel of my being without resistance, without fear, without hesitation. For years, I had believed that strength was found in control, in mastering the world through knowledge, discipline, and will. But now I saw that the greatest strength was the courage to release all that, to let go of the illusion of mastery, and to trust the unfolding mystery of existence. The ego that clung so tightly to its titles and accomplishments was not the true self, but a fragile mask. True selfhood was a flame that burned brighter the more it surrendered, a light that could only shine when the barriers of resistance fell away. As the evening deepened and the stars began their silent vigil overhead, I thought back on the many seasons of my life, the triumphs and the heartbreaks, the moments of clarity and the dark nights of the soul. Each was a step along the path of surrender, a lesson in letting go. I recalled the faces of those who had walked with me, friends who questioned my transformation, family who feared my loss of control, strangers who glimpsed something changed in my eyes. Their reactions were mirrors reflecting my own fears and attachments, inviting me to release not only what I held to be true about the world but what I believed about myself. The paradox of surrender became clearer to me. It was both a breaking and a becoming. Like a seed that must crack open before a new life can emerge, I too had to break through the hardened shell of certainty and pride to awaken to the vastness within. This breaking was painful, yes, but it was also the birth of freedom. With each layer that fell away, I felt lighter, more alive, more connected to the unspoken song that moves through all creation. I remembered the words of Shams, whose presence was like a flame that both warmed and challenged me. Surrender is the dance of the soul with the beloved, he had said, a dance where the self dissolves and only love remains. Those words echoed in my heart, becoming a mantra, a call to return again and again to the openness of surrender. It was not a final destination but an ever-renewing journey, a continual invitation to trust, to yield, to fall and rise in the arms of divine love.